call it the race of truth, because of course that's when they all escape. So we're looking down in the beautiful gorges here which abound as we go down now towards the south. And there's the whole peloton in the Tour de France enjoying the hottest day so far, over 90 degrees. We'll take our break. Rejoin us on OLN soon.
The 2003.
And welcome back as we head out through the department of the Var today, heading south to the famous Mediterranean shores of this very varied country of France. 171 riders in the race. One rider out, by the way, didn't start today, was the former winner of the Tour of Italy, Stefano Garzelli. He's also out now. Right then, well, I hope you're enjoying watching the Running of the Bulls here on the Outdoor Life Network. We are continuing with the Running of the Bulls from Pamplona. It's weekdays coming to you at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Enjoy it. So the long peloton there. The sun still beating down and they've still got 2 hours to race. This is Nick Gates here, Paul. The Australian looked a little bit shaky when he started in the Tour, and he is wallowing round the back there near that famous long-term rouge position, last man, the red light, but beginning to settle into the Tour, I think.
It doesn't matter if you finish last in the Tour de France. The important thing, Phil, is to finish it. I was pretty close to finishing last overall myself on one occasion. I was actually 141st out of 144 finishers. And I was a little bit upset on that occasion. But, you know, Nick Gates will enjoy the weather because he comes from Australia. And this man, Jens Voigt, enjoys it too. But it's a very hot day this afternoon. 91 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of humidity as well at 58%. It is slightly hazy up there. And that's probably what has brought in that rather big humidity we've got here this afternoon. But all along the route, Phil, remarkable the way people are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Tour de France this year. Really enjoying it.
Everybody taking part. Remember that there is another classification in the Tour de France, especially for the 100th edition this year. They're adding together the times of the riders on the special stages that visit the towns on the original route. Now, Alessandro Petacchi won the stage into Lyon, but he's no longer in the race. He's now abandoned the race. So the rider's second on that stage at Baden-Cook. He is the leader of that classification after one stage. The second stage will come today on the road to Marseille. We've also got Toulouse and Bordeaux and Nantes before we get back to Paris. The original towns that were on the very original Tour de France route in 1903. This man here looking rather laden, isn't he, Roberto Heras? He's got all the bottles for the team. He's got the bandage round his knee since that fall when he was helping Lance through the Alps near the barrage de Chambon. But he is now going back to give him a drink, which is his job as the so-called super domestique. The roads around here, this is very typical of this area. We're not far away now from Provence, off to the rider's right shoulder, very popular tourist area. The lead is maximum 22:02 right now, and these roads narrow, twisty, duck and dive, very tortuous roads. You can't afford not to pay attention at times. Very sinuous, and the roads, which even in the height of the season are often very quiet because the tourists tend to be racing south on the main highways, heading to the sun on the beaches of Nice and the Côte d'Azur and down to Marseille itself. Marseille, the second biggest city here in France, and what a beautiful city it is, but it's steeped in history.
It certainly is. The history going back to pre-Roman times. In fact, Julius Caesar came here and took the place over for a short period, and it was very much twinned with Naples and Pompeii. But for the moment, the riders don't have a lot of time to think about all of that history as they charge into town here. And in fact, Phil, the number of nationalities in the Tour de France being rapidly reduced because of the number of abandons through the mountains. It's amazing how many riders disappeared in just those 3 days as these riders come through the 500-meter to-go point. They're not really worried about this at all because they're a long way down. The time gap has gone over 22 minutes. We often get days like this in the Tour de France, and US Postal Service will be, I think, fairly relieved by the composition of that breakaway, because that breakaway is not really at all a danger.
There's the delivery boy, Roberto Heras. Now remember, we had 198 at the start in Paris almost 2 weeks ago, week and a half. 171 are left. Now we had 22 teams in the race, still have, but only 7 of them have all 9 riders, and the big dropout is Fassa Bortolo. They've only got 3 left of their 9, and in fact the team management apologised to the organisation for the mass departure on the 8th stage because of the number of dropouts. There was a virus, they say, spreading throughout the team, and a number of riders caught it, and they lost all their strength and they've gone home. So there's only Ivan Basso riding extremely well overall. Maurizio Busegin and Dario Cioni left in. Well, this hotspot sprint here, Paul, it's over 20 minutes now since we had the breakaway go through, which was won by Damien Nazon. They look to me, the way they're riding, they're going to be 30 minutes down very shortly.
Which reminds us a little bit about the breakaway in Pontarlier a couple of years ago, which took a 30-minute advantage, and actually on that occasion put Lance Armstrong into difficulty because there were a couple of good riders in that breakaway on that occasion. One, Andrei Kivilev, who passed away this year in the early part of the season with a rather sad and dramatic crash in the Paris-Nice race. And that may well be what has given the motivation to Alexander Vinokurov this year, Phil, because Vinokurov riding an incredible season with us starting off with a win in Paris-Nice, a win in the Amstel Gold Race, followed that up with a win in the Tour of Switzerland, and he has to now really be regarded as a man who could even challenge in the high spots of the Tour de France.
So passing through the town of Rion at the moment. Steady pacemaking. They've come through the sprint there, but they've still got an awful long way to go yet as we look down at some of the beauty of this stage of the Tour de France. So, pens and papers out. Here's the question for our Subway Trivia question today. Last year's best young rider was Fassa Bortolo's Ivan Basso. I just told you about him. Which two riders have won the best young rider competition and the overall title in the same year? There are, in fact, two only. So tell me who they are, and I'll tell you after the break. And welcome back. Here's the question. Last year's best young rider was Fassa Bortolo's Ivan Basso. Which two riders have won the best young rider competition and the overall title? Two great names of the sport. 1983, Laurent Fignon also won the Tour a year later. And in 1997, Jan Ullrich, who until this year has never finished lower than second. And who knows, he might be second or first again. There's still a long way to go on the route of the Tour de France this year. We're on a long stage today of 219 kilometres, the 11th day of the race, as we head down toward Marseille. The breakaway, 22 minutes up. Now, as we look down at the peloton, it looks as though they've started to lift the tempo just a little bit. You can see for yourself here, there's very, very barren landscape here, not many hills around. It is a very, very hot sun. Just a few clouds passing through, which they did promise us at the weather centre to cool the riders down a little bit on the middle part of the stage. But even so, we are talking very, very hot temperatures here. 91 degrees Fahrenheit, that's about 35 degrees Celsius. And it could get hotter because down in Marseille, which is where we are commentating from, it feels well over 100 degrees.
We're very lucky, in fact, that there's a wind blowing this afternoon as well, and there always is in this part of the world. There are two major winds in the southern part of France. One is the Mistral, which blows down the Rhone Valley, and we actually finish in the Bouches du Rhône. Well, it seems to be coming up. The other wind which comes across from Italy is the Tramontana, and it does seem as if there is a fair breeze coming up here, but it's obviously not coming into the commentary position at the moment.
Well, just watching down the bunch there, it's the job of the team leader's team to set the pace. They will obviously do it, but they don't have to do it if other teams take over, obviously. But it's always the responsibility of the man in the maillot jaune to put his team on the front and control it unless they attack him. It's the safest way to ride the Tour because he's got control here of the big peloton. All of his teammates, and they're all there in front of him, just looking after him. If he has a problem, they will know faster than anybody. There'll be dedicated riders there. Their job is to stop with Armstrong if he has a problem. If it's a serious problem like a broken bike, they'll have a bike on one of the riders who'll ride near him, same size and build, so that bike will fit him and he's quickly back in the race. The poor old helper, though, he has to wait to be repaired at the back of the race and could spend the rest of the day chasing the big pack.
That's why it's so important to have a strong team, and in fact interesting to look down the composition of the teams who've still got a full complement of riders. We get some unbelievable people at the side of the road.
That'll never lay an egg, I'll tell you.
But he'll end up with the Angels.
The Angel of the Mountains, Charlie Gore. We saw him a few times in the Alps. He's an elderly man now, but still very much a gentleman. As he saw the Tour de France, he won the Tour de France in the mid-50s, as well as the King of the Mountains on a couple of occasions. He was our original Angel of the Mountains. Then we had an Eagle of Toledo, which was the nickname they gave Federico Baramontes. I don't think Lucien Van Impe also won 6 King of the Mountains. He never had a nickname, did he, Paul?
No, not all riders get a nickname. There was a battle a few years ago between Lance Armstrong and between Marco Pantani, because Pantani liked to be called Il Pirata, the pirate.
Yeah.
And Armstrong used to call him Elefantino because he had rather large ears. And occasionally Pantani tried to come back at Armstrong, calling him El Americano. They never really stuck. You have to earn a nickname, which is what Armstrong said at the time. But Pantani must have been a little bit worried about the nickname Elefantino because he had an operation of plastic surgery on his ears this winter to have him pinned back like a Doberman.
And in fact, I hardly recognised him at the Giro d'Italia, which was the Tour of Italy. Now the riders here more preoccupied with their visitations back to the race. The breakaway, though, has got all the quality in it. I don't think it'll go down to the line as this group. There is a 4th category hill to come at 170 kilometres. That's just on 50 kilometres to race today. Might be a chance to split up the race and assess the strength of these riders. But also, most interesting approach to the finish, Paul. It's about 25 kilometres around Marseille.
Very complicated. In fact, it is 25 kilometres throughout the streets of Marseille, and some of it actually going out along the coast, where it is exceptionally windy right now.
Well, we're looking at Vince, our cameraman down there. I wouldn't have known that, by the way, but like you, I can see his name, as he has a real hot job to keep the peloton in Fadoun. He'll be camera bike number 3, I would think. We'll take another short break and rejoin us here on OLN. And welcome back. We're with the Tour de France. It's stage 10. We're heading to Marseille. It is the hottest day. The boys are boiling down there. But it looks to me now as though they're getting a little bit more angry with the route because they've allowed a breakaway to run to its longest lead so far, 21 minutes and 47 seconds. Well, as we look here at the riders get a day off tomorrow, don't forget. And I'm sure they'll be welcome for that, but they still have to get down to Narbonne, which is about 4 hours in a car before they can enjoy a rest day. We will, of course, be bringing you, as usual, a programme, a chance for us to look back at the story so far, and what a story it has been ever since Levi Leipheimer crashed out on day 2. That'll be tomorrow, 8:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Make a note of that, and you can bring yourself up to date with the first 12 days of the Tour de France. Well, a change of everybody, Paul, as we look at the breakaway. Nobody seems to be a passenger here. They're all just doing steady pacemaking. They're getting regular time checks. They're up to their maximum now, 21 minutes, 42 seconds. Worth reminding you all, I think, of the names. From Spain, we've got Vincenti Garcia Costa. From Holland, Bram de Groot. Fabio Sacchi, an Italian. Philippe Gaumin of France. Jacob Pill of Denmark. It's really international, isn't it? Jose Enrico Gutierrez of Spain. Serge Baguet, he's a Belgian. Another Frenchman in Damien Nazon, and a German in René Hasselbacher. I think we can safely call that a fully international breakaway.
A very international breakaway. I think what's important, though, is what you said earlier, Phil. The fact is that this breakaway has got some very good sprinters in it, and that will not go unnoticed. Hasselbacher and Nazon are very fast men. So is Fabio Sacchi and Philippe Gaumin. I have a feeling towards the end what will happen is they will try and split this group, because the riders like Vincenti Garcia Acosta, Jakob Pale and Gutierrez will feel that the advantage for them is to try and get away on their own before we come down to the finishing line.
The crowd enjoying its day. We had what could have been a rather ugly incident back in the main field about an hour ago. Munoz de Muniain, one of the riders on the Euskaltel team, hit a spectator, ran out in front of a young boy, in fact, knocked the cyclist off, but Lopez de Muniain it was. I'm very happy to say that he's a bit scratched up. He caught up with the race. The doctors also had to treat the young spectator, but he's okay. Superficial scratches, a few Tour de France souvenirs, I think, but happily both okay, and that's the most important thing. But it's always a hazard when you race through so many people on the stage of the Tour de France.
Let's not forget what an unbelievable number of people watched the Tour de France on the stage of the Alpe d'Huez. The police report was there were 602,000 spectators on a road up to the Alpe d'Huez, which was less than 10 miles long. And I have to admit, Phil, there's more than I have ever seen on those roads in the recent years. Oh, there's a protest here. This is a protest by the artists, the temporary artists who have been protesting for the last week or so, and they in fact made a threat to the organisation of the Tour de France and Jean-Marie Leblanc and to Jacques Chirac, the president of the country, that if they didn't sort out their problems, the Tour de France would not reach Paris.
Well, we'll see what they do about this. These are live pictures, and of course this is the riders from the US Postal Team who will be first to get there. They will not do the cause much good, because the people of France will get very upset about this. And we'll see what they do. The breakaway has gone through, of course, safely, so the gap is opening up. The gendarmes have arrived, but they are just wanting to drive through and continue. Here come the riders. Now we've seen this before, Paul, on the Tour de France and on other bike races. In fact, I remember on the stage through to a place called Fontaine-au-Père, smallest town on the race route, never got there to the finish because there was striking steel workers in the town of Denain, where you won a race there, by the way. Well, it wasn't the only one, it was a good win.
Yeah. You got a good memory, Phil.
Tour, yeah. They stopped the tour, and that was the first time a tour stage was ever cancelled. And the organisation, Felix Leviton at the time, had promised that little town, who had really gone to town, literally, to welcome the race, promised them the race would come back next year, and it did.
This is a complete standstill for the riders. They'll actually take this as a bit of a joke right now, because it's fortunately a stage where there is not too much going on. There is a breakaway situation of 9 riders who are not dangerous at all in the overall classification, and the guys will have quite a laugh about that tonight. But there's interesting to note, there are a lot of black-shirted police in there. I would say that is the French paramilitary, and they were expecting this because they were on the ground very quickly in the middle of nowhere.
Well, they will be literally bundled off to the side of the road, I can assure you of that. The police have dealt with a lot of situations over the years with the Tour de France. They don't do it in a gentlemanly manner. They'll be off the road now to the way. The race will go on. It's not an important situation at the moment. Looks as though they're all back into the saddle now, so they're all moving away. It'll be interesting to see later on what the time gap is. They've lost a couple of minutes, maybe, as they continue. So there we are. The Tour de France momentarily comes to a halt, but it's continuing, and so are we on OLN.
Aside from providing a beautiful backdrop for the riders of the Tour de France, the landscapes of Provence were a colorful canvas for many of the famous impressionistic artists. The village des Bourries was built from the 14th to the 18th century, but some Bourries discovered in Apt date back to the Neolithic age, 2,000 years before Christ. The Fontaine de Vaucluse is the largest and most powerful natural spring in this country. Jacques Cousteau almost died here trying to reach the bottom of the 1,300-foot pool. I'm at the restaurant Les Bourries above the village of Gordes, where chef Philippe Calandry has created 2 delicate, flavorful dishes from the south of France. Le pigeonneau cuit au plat avec sa cuisse en caillette is an oven-roasted breast of pigeon with herbes de Provence, served with a minced pork and vegetable sausage, barley risotto, and garnished with chanterelles and white truffles. The dessert, tarte citron, is a sweet lemon cream tart over a butter cookie crust with a splash of crystallized caramel over the top. It is featured with an almondine and garnished with nutmeg and an apricot reduction sauce. Bon appetit.
Gosh, Pam, how do you get a job like that? That's Pam Fletcher. First time we've seen it in our afternoon live show, but don't forget our morning show as far as it is in America. But you can see Pam and my other great friend Sam Posey. They do special features in our evening primetime show. We're back with the riders now, and it's 8 o'clock, by the way, every evening. Looking at the men from US Postal now, they are back at work here. We are now coursing our way. We are 53.6 kilometers to go on this day. Let's have a quick look at the map. Remember, we're heading down to the Mediterranean and the beautiful city of Marseille today. We're rolling away from the high mountains down to the undulations, and eventually we'll be at sea level by the time we get into the city, where we have a 25-kilometer lap of that great city. The breakaway is now 23 minutes 47 seconds ahead. Well, we're looking here now at the riders just pulling themselves back together again. This is Pablo Lastras. Field more or less has regrouped. Interesting point, Paul. This breakaway, 23:47. I reckon 2 minutes lost at the demonstration there. I couldn't think of the word in English for the moment, at the demonstration. And the record of the long breakaway, which has proved successful, was in Pontarlier. Paul has some painful memories of Pontarlier. I might tell you about that one day. 35 minutes and 54 seconds was the successful escape.
That was a dangerous escape too on that occasion, because there were two riders in that group who were put in a situation of being able to hold the yellow jersey for a long time. One of them was Francois Simon, the youngest brother of the famous Simon brothers. In fact, his brother Pascal wore the yellow jersey in the Tour de France. And Régis Simon was one of the other brothers who I actually raced with for a couple of years. He was a stage winner at the Tour de France, as was the middle brother, Jérôme. He too won a stage of the Tour in Strasbourg. But there have been some huge solo victories as well with big advantages, because José Luis Viejo won a long stage in the mountains to this region, in fact, to Manosque back in 1976. And his winning advantage was 22 minutes and 50 seconds. And the British rider, I'm sure you'll remember this, Phil, Brian Robinson, he won a stage in 1959, and his winning margin was 20 minutes and 6 seconds.
Well, I'll tell you what, I go for one particular bike ride. We call it Phil and Friends. We ride every year in the Peak District in Great Britain for a charity. And Brian, he's 72 now, Paul, and he still gets rid of me on the climbs. He is the most amazing man. He still rides with the young riders on the bikes. He trains with them, and he says, but you know, Phil, I don't go to the front so much now. He's an absolutely fantastic guy, and I'm sure Brian's enjoying watching this year's Tour de France, but he was a fabulous rider in the Tour de France, that's for sure.
It was a tough stage that he won too. It was a big mountain stage, and he took off a long way from the finishing line. And it's amazing some of the escapades that have gone down. And I always believe that if you've ridden the Tour de France and finished the Tour de France, most of the stuff that you do in the rest of your life is not really all that difficult.
Yeah, I would say that's a good way of putting it. They are amazing athletes, pedaling around the whole of this very varied country. And finally, remember, this race is got to now go across the hot bottom part of the country as we head towards the Pyrenees, and then we're back into the high mountains. We've got the time trialing the day, 2 days after the rest day, which is tomorrow, and then we move down towards the Pyrenees. Then it's been hot all of the tour so far, Paul, but when you get round to Bordeaux, that usually is where you cook.
It's very hot, and if this kind of temperature persists, there's going to be a lot of tired bike riders. So many men abandoned the Tour de France over the last couple of days and pulled out in the mountain passes.
Well, we're looking down now on the town of Rions, which is where the peloton are arriving, while the breakaway are long since past that now. 24 minutes is the gap at the moment. Now, don't forget, tomorrow night, and that's at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, you can go into the chat room and dial us up on olntv.com and chat with both Paul and me, Phil Liggett, and we'll spend an hour with you, bring all the questions on board, and we'll have some fun. That's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be 8 o'clock here in France. So enjoy that as we look at the riders continuing again today. We'll just take a short break, come back again and rejoin us on the Outdoor Life Network. Well, welcome back to our coverage of the Tour de France today. We're on that 219-kilometre long straight road from Gap down to Marseille today. We still have 9 riders in the lead. We're just starting the climb, and as they do, there is an attack there from Vicente Garcia Acosta. I was about to tell you, we're just starting the last climb of the day. It's only a 4th category, small, shallow climb. But this is the Côte du Jaillet, 3.3 kilometres long. They've been on the climb. There's a huge crowd here. And there's a counter-attack on there from Serge Baguet as Baguet goes past that French flag. And they've come after them. A big reaction. The last man on the back here, Jose Enrique Gutierrez of Kelme. He's more of a sprinter, although he's the best placed rider in this breakaway. 47 minutes behind Lance Armstrong. And I think they've more or less all come together, because Baguet goes over the top, followed by Garcia Acosta, and Bram de Groot was the rider who got over the top there. There's the confirmation of that in 3rd place. He just gets a point for 3rd place. Well, That was an obvious move, and the riders knew it as well, because Vicente Garcia da Costa is the sort of man who would have used that as a springboard. He's not a sprinter. He needs to get away by himself. It didn't work out for him. They've nailed him back, and they might well settle down. Well, forget that piece of commentary, Liggett, because this now is an attack by Jose Enrique Gutierrez, who has now opened up a gap. And he is a sprinter who is now trying to go for home as well. This is the sort of attack I didn't really expect for, because this man isn't a bad sprinter.
Well, he was looking at the reaction of the other riders. We saw a flurry of attacks, the first one coming from Vicente Garcia Acosta on the slopes of that small fourth category climb there, and when he saw that everyone was starting to suffer, he thought, well, I'll go for it, and he hit them very hard, and he's opened up a gap of about 150 meters. If they want to pull him back right now, they need to get themselves organized very quickly.
Well, he's working hard, but he's left himself a huge job on his shoulders here. Remember what happened yesterday to the men who tried to break away in the hot sun. They blew in the end and didn't finish with the chasing groups. It's a huge gamble, but you have to sometimes lay down your plans very early. He might be going away now to try and see who the strong men are that might join him, and just reduce the size of that breakaway by 1 or 2 riders. There must be weak men in that breakaway now, because they broke away at 16 kilometers, and we are now just 49 from the finish.
Well, his plan right now is really to try and see if somebody will leap away from the group behind him, because I think the majority of these riders feel they wanted to get rid of Hasselbacher, who's a very fast sprinter.
Yes.
He went down in that dramatic crash on the roads to Saint-Dizier, and of course Damien Nazon and the Frenchman. Don't discount Philippe Gaumont as a good sprinter, because he surprised everyone a couple of years ago with a win in the Ghent-Wevelgem one-day classic in Belgium. But this man has got himself a very good gap right now, and after a long breakaway like this, he's got a good chance of surviving.
Well, there's a dizzy shot for you. Our camera motorbike there just ahead of him. He's not as close as the camera appears, of course. The equipment gives a rather bad sense of location for the man, but he is a little bit further away than he appears. He's just letting him go by anyway. Now we switch back down the road, 24 minutes and 5 seconds with the wonders of television. This is the peloton, the big pack. 171 riders at the start of the Tour de France today. If you're just joining us, Stefano Gartelli, 2 years ago the winner of the Tour of Italy, did not start, had a sore throat, and the rumour is that Gilberto Simoni, the winner of this year's Tour of Italy, is also not going to continue after today. Now, this is interesting, Paul. Euskaltel has split up the US Postal Boys.
Tactical manoeuvre. They've not split them up. They've actually come forward to help set the pacemaking, because this is the team who are leading the overall team classification at the start of the day. And the Spaniards take the team classification very seriously indeed. Over the last few years, there have been huge battles between Ibernesto.com, Once and Kelme. But right now, if this small Spanish team, Euskaltel Euskadi, could win the team classification at the Tour de France, it would be a huge feather in their hat. And that's why they want to try and reduce the massive margin right now. The team classification is based on the first 3 riders on any individual stage. But if the breakaway succeeds right now, the teams which with men in the break will have a 24-minute lead after today's stage.
Looking at the man who had a pink jersey for just 1 day in the year 2000 in the Tour of Italy. Great moment. It's a great moment, really, because there are very few Spanish riders get their hands on an Italian Maglia Rosa. But as the race continues, the peloton huddles together, and it's certainly not for warmth today. 24 minutes the gap. We'll be back. As we look out across the beautiful area here of the far south of France, it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the breakaway is still 24 minutes in front. They are not improving at all, as the 9 men are now, well, there's 8 now chasing 1 man, because this is a brave attack here by Gutierrez over the top of the Côte de Juillet. Well, Paul, this is beginning to look a very nice move. They're working out. He's got a 33-second lead just now. I think to go into the streets of Marseille, though, he's going to need a couple of minutes to hold them off.
Well, they need to get themselves organised very quickly to pull him back, because he will build all of the time right now. And what will happen as they get closer to the finish, the riders like Hasselbacher, Nazon and Gaumont will begin to think about the sprint. So they'll start to miss turns at the back of the group, and the group will then lose a certain amount of its impetus. This is Rolf Aldag. Big Rolf had a great day in the Alps with a 200-kilometre breakaway a couple of days ago. In fact, that was Mario Ertz, the same style of bike rider, actually, but
tall and thin.
Aldag had a great day.
He did.
Spent a day in the mountains wearing the King of the Mountains jersey, which was quite a surprise for him after a very brave attack when he joined Richard Virenque on the slopes of a very difficult climb outside of Morzine called the Col de la Ramaz. The main field, though, Phil, today, I have to say, are having a day off, and you can't blame them because we've had some pretty seriously difficult days through the mountains.
Yes, and you know, the Telecom team, remember, that was the team of Jan Ullrich, and Ullrich finally got into the Tour after being really out of the sport for the best part of 18 months, one reason or another, which are very well documented. But he's back now, and I think he still will be a big challenger to Lance Armstrong as this race goes on, because he's not used to this level of competition over the last 18 months, and he's warming to it very, very well. And I think he'll go well in the Pyrenees, and we expect him to ride equally well in the time trial. Telecom, who allowed Ullrich to go, and I think it was a good decision by Ullrich to leave that team so he could start life anew, as it were. Have had a pretty poor tour, but not through their fault. Cadel Evans of Australia, who was here, signed up to try and win the Tour de France for them. He was unable to ride. He broke his collarbone twice in pretty quick succession, so there's no way he could get fit enough. Santiago Botero, who did most of his racing in South America this year, who's also signed big time. He's the World Time Trial champion. He actually fell ill in the Tour of Germany and hadn't recovered when this race started. He lost big time early on. But Alexander Vinokourov, who won yesterday, has once again given them hope.
Well, he's a great bike rider, and I think he's changed a lot this year, Phil, because of the fact that in the early part of the season, one of his very good friends and compatriots, Andrei Kivilev, died on the roads of Paris-Nice. And since then, Vinokourov has changed an awful lot, and he's become much more of a leader of the team. He was also overshadowed, Phil, by his team leader Jan Ullrich for many years, and it looks to me as if Lopez de Muña is in a bit of difficulty at the back of the field. He was involved in the crash earlier on, yeah.
It was a bit more serious to the rider than actually came to us on the race radio, I think, because he has been up and down to the race doctor's car. He's obviously got his elbow bandaged. The spectator he hit was a young boy, a garçon who ran out in front of him, apparently. He was the unlucky one. He hit him, but the boy also is okay. He's gone to the hospital for x-rays, but he's not in any life-threatening injury or anything like that. And so we're afraid it looks as though that poor man is going to have to limp in the heat of the day. Back up to the leader, just to bring the whole picture back to you now. 9 riders breaking clear at 16 kilometres today. We are now at kilometre 180 of 219. And on the top of the last climb, the Côte du Jaillet, on this 10th stage of the Tour de France, Jose Enrique Gutierrez got clear, currently leading, and it's going up by 45 seconds, Paul, while the main chase group are 23-25 ahead of the peloton.
It's sensibly increasing for this man right now. He'd obviously sensed the right moment to go on the attack. There'd been a flurry of attacks on the small climb of the Côte du Jaillet. It was only a 4th category climb. It was 50 kilometers to go from the summit, but an ideal launch pad. The man who started the frenzy of attacks was Vicente Garcia Acosta. This man stayed at the back of the group, allowed everybody to chase down the early attacks, and then as soon as they slowed down, he took a page out of the handbook and he leapt out of the front end of the group, especially on a day where it is exceptionally hot, 91 degrees Fahrenheit, 58% humidity, and there is a certain amount of cloud in the latter part of the day building up just to keep the humidity here at the finish line in Marseille.
Well, overall, of course, Lance Armstrong is still in that yellow jersey down there. If he finishes in it today, he'll have 49 of them for his collection over the 4 years he's won the Tour de France. 5 if he makes it to Paris in yellow this time. Still being challenged, though, 21 seconds only ahead of Alexander Vinokourov, who won yesterday. Iban Mayo, a great candidate to move into yellow, you know. And Johan Brunel, the manager of US Postal, said they will only defend it if they feel it's not hurting the team too much. They are quite prepared to give the race lead away to somebody else, let them take on the mantle of leading the Tour, and then try and take it back later on if they feel it's necessary. They won't feel it's necessary today, though, Paul, because we've got 9 riders ahead of the peloton. The best placed is this man who's escaped, Jose Enrique Gutierrez, but he's 47 minutes behind Lance Armstrong. Well done, lads. You've done a great job. That's fantastic.
Côte de Provence, that's the wine that comes from this region, normally reputed as for its production of rosé. And You think you know all about that, Phil?
Well, it's a very light wine, so we can drink about half a bottle of that per week, I think. Yes.
That's all because of the heat down here. It's very difficult to partake in that side of the French gourmandise. Anyway, the main field are certainly thinking about turning up the screws, and there's been a change in the tactics on the front end of the main field. This is Mark Wouters at the back. He's the former Belgian national champion, former yellow jersey wearer in the Tour de France, and of course a winner of the stage into Antwerp when the Tour went up into Belgium a couple of years ago.
Norwegian flag flying on the right of the course there. There's only one Norwegian rider in the race, Thor Hushovd. He's in the French Crédit Agricole team, and he's riding extremely well. Here we go, the long thin line, the twisting snake of the Tour de France. 162 riders in that peloton, weaving their way towards Marseille. I hope you're enjoying the live coverage here on OLN, and we'll be back.
And welcome back to OLN's exclusive coverage of the 2003 Tour de France. I'm here with Bob Roll. Before we get back to the action of Stage 10, the stage before the well-deserved rest day, this is kind of a good day, Bob, to kind of teach us some things about cycling that we're not necessarily all up on. Give us the scoop here. You mentioned that there's going to be a long breakaway today. Earlier on in the pre-race show, and we're seeing exactly what you said. I mean, I know you're good and all, but...
Well, thank you, but to me, it's like an obvious situation that would happen, normally transpire in a major tour like this. Lance Armstrong knows he is 47 minutes ahead of the highest placed man in the breakaway. Now, if that rider was 17 minutes ahead, they would never let the gap grow to these epic proportions that we're seeing today. I thought there would be a breakaway, but the Tour de France is like a chess game with human-sized pieces on horseback, and the directors are trying to get their riders to do just exactly what's required to maintain time. It's all run on time for the yellow jersey. So at the end of each stage, the time is taken from first place. We saw Iban Mayo get 2 minutes on Lance Armstrong on the Alpe d'Huez stage, but Lance started the stage about 4 or 5 minutes ahead of him, and so he knows he has to conserve that much time between himself and Iban Mayo, for example, or Jose Enrique Gutierrez. He will get a message in his earpiece from their coach, Johan Brunel, who's in the team car monitoring the time up the road that each breakaway is and who is in that breakaway. So he knows how to meter out the effort of the U.S. Postal team. And you can see them on the front. They are with the Euskaltel-Euskadi team making a steady tempo. They know they need to keep that gap to Jose Enrique Gutierrez less than 47 minutes by the finish to keep the yellow jersey. Now, Alexander Vinokourov got some good time back on Lance Armstrong because of that crash when he was rotating with Yoshiba Boloki, chasing down Vinokourov. So he probably miscalculated that a little bit because there was also a 20-second time bonus on the line, so he got very close to Lance Armstrong. Even though the gap was enough to be 41 seconds, his time came down even further because of the time bonus on the line. Now, one thing that Lance is always calculating, even if a rider in a breakaway like Jorg Jaks yesterday, for example, if he had gotten the 3.5, 4 minutes at the line, he's also calculating the chances of that rider to do well in the stages to come. Let's see, for example, the Pyrenees, and Jorg Jaks has a couple of bad days. He could lose upwards of an hour on GC time. So they have to know the capabilities of each rider throughout the whole tour. And if there's a fancy rider, such as Simoni, such as Boloki, such as Vinokourov now or Jan Ullrich, they won't give them any time at all. It would be a race right on. As we saw when Yoshiba Boloki was attacking, shunk, Lance was right on the wheel. It's all about time. It's a moving chess game, and that's why it's so complicated and dynamic. A very new sport to the United States, and it's such a pleasure to work for the OLN. We can continue to elucidate the people on one of the most beautiful sports in the world.
And it's such a pleasure to have you here to break it all down for us. Make it easy for us. Biking 101 with Bob Roll. Let's go ahead and get back to the action in Stage 10.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. And Bob Roll. Bob knows all the answers. Once rode the Tour de France 3 times. Just think, Bob, you could be out there today sweltering under this sun, working your legs off, but instead you're not. The peloton, though, are chasing at 22 3/4 minutes, and at the front, Gutierrez, they are beginning to haul him back. A massive field down here now as they thread their way through an audience which I don't know where they've come from, but they can't move anywhere because of the closed roads now. And the roads will not open until the voiture balai, the final vehicle, the sag wagon, the sweeping vehicle that picks everybody up should they stop by the roadside, goes by. Behind that will be one police car, and then the road will open up behind the passage of the Tour de France. Well, this has become a complete team during the Tour de France. Euskaltel-Euskadi, as Paul Sherwen has said, they're racing now to try and save their team lead here because they had such a wonderful time in the Alps with Roberto Laiseca and Jaime Zubeldia. But then it'd be a shame to lose the team lead by a silly move like this that contains none of the top finishers in the Tour de France in Paris. But they can always get it back in the Pyrenees.
They can always get it back in the Pyrenees, where I think they will go absolutely ballistic. It's basically home turf for them. They're right up along the Basque area of Spain, where we're going to go over the next week of racing in the Tour de France. Unfortunately for them, they've lost one man along the way, Sammy Sanchez, who we've seen very aggressive in races like the Giro d'Italia and, of course, races like the Tour of Italy as well. And it is unfortunate for him, but I think he will progress as the race goes on. Really, Phil had a hard time with the heat that we've had here at the Tour over the last couple of days.
It was sad that he went out. He was eliminated on the route. He came in with a time 69 minutes slower than the winner of the stage, Richard Virenque, on that particular day. On the road to Alpe as it was, where Sanchez was eliminated. But 69 minutes is a long time. He was about 10 minutes too late, and therefore the judges wouldn't allow him to restart. Very sad.
But he didn't abandon. He wanted to finish. He didn't want to stop at the side of the road and climb into the bus at the back end of the race and finish in the car. He knew he was having a hard day. Axel Merckx had a very difficult day too, because he lost himself around about 40 minutes on that occasion, and I didn't think he was going to get inside the time limit when we saw him going over the summit of the Col du Galibier.
I absolutely agree, but there's still 171 men heading for the rest day tomorrow. Looking here at the man trying to stay away, no further update. He's holding a 30-second lead over the 8 others. You needn't worry about the peloton. They're too far behind today. We'll continue towards Marseille after this break. Yes, welcome back everybody to the Cauldron of southern France. The riders going today on the 10th stage, road race stage, down to Marseille. 171, he's still away, Jose Enrique Gutierrez, but they're catching him. 25 seconds only in front now of the erstwhile breakaway he was with, but the field is still out of the hunt. They are 22 minutes and 50 seconds back, and they only have 27.8 kilometers to go. Well, one man back in that pack is enjoying the Tour de France, to put it mildly. And we can now take a look at a young and up-and-coming rider with Infinity, accelerating the future. We are talking about, of course, Denis Menchov. He's currently 10th overall in the Tour de France and has the white jersey as the best young rider. He's only a few victories to his name, but when it wins, he really does make it count. He won the overall at the Tour de l'Avenir, the race of the future, the sort of amateur Tour de France 2 years ago. And he's now still only 25 years of age, stands at 5'11" and weighs a mere 141 pounds. This man is a powerhouse. Note his name. We're going to see a lot of him in the years ahead. Denis Menchov. The field coursing down these roads, freewheeling behind, funnily enough now, Euskaltel-Euskadi. So the leaders have done a good job at the front end of the race, but the gap at 22 minutes and 50 seconds, Paul, these boys have lost all ambition for the day. They're looking forward to the rest day tomorrow, which is not in Marseille, by the way. It's all hands in the motor vehicles, and it's a 4-hour drive down to Narbonne, and that's where the rest day is. So what they'll do is they'll probably go down in the morning, have a spot of lunch, and then go for a 3-hour bike ride in the afternoon.
But you know, I've always thought it was a bit of a laugh to call it a rest day, Phil, because in fact these guys will have to go out on the bikes anyway. They'll have to go out and probably do, with the temperature the way it is, about 3 hours, but nice and slowly, just to make sure that there's no build-up in the lactic acid in the legs. Just keep themselves nice and loose.
They have to have rest days in a race of 3 weeks. That's the international regulation. They must have at least one. They can have a transfer day. They have to have one day which is really a rest day. There's no travel. The riders stay where they finish. The one tomorrow is called a rest and transfer day. So they get ferried off down to Narbonne, further along the coast, 4 hours further along the coast, and then they will go bike riding. But many bike riders do not like rest days, because the day after the rest day very often changes the overall classification. Some riders, and Jacques Anquetil was an example of this, the 5-time winner of the Tour, he never rode well the day after a rest day.
Well, if we remember a couple of years ago, neither did Christophe Moreau, the great Frenchman. He was lying in 4th place in the overall classification. The day after the rest day, the race went right up into the Pyrenees, and after about 50 kilometers, he just pulled off and abandoned. The body can react in a very strange way, having been exposed to these very hard repetitions of efforts for about 11, 12 days of racing. Then all of a sudden, not going out and punishing it really can cause a surprise to the system.
Now we're looking here at the peloton, still led by the Basque team, trying to save their team lead, but I think that's a fat hope now. We're now reaching the halfway point, don't forget, of this year's Tour, and it was hard. It was after 37 kilometers of the stage today. But the rider still out in front, Gutierrez, by just 20 seconds. We are just on the outskirts of Marseille now. We're going to see huge crowds. We wind our way in from the north. We're heading really in a westerly direction, straight to the coast, then we go right along the plage at Marseille. It is a lovely, lovely route for the riders now. It must take tremendous organisation to close the roads as we approach Marseille. We've left the high Alps, we've gone now into the Bouches-du-Rhône department of France. Marseille right down in the far south, on the shores of the wonderful Mediterranean Sea, and this rider now is going to get the first taste of the narrower streets of Marseille. We will pass right through the heart of Marseille, Paul, through the old port. Those streets are narrow. How on earth they've closed them down for the Tour de France is like shutting down any major city in the world.
Well, I think actually Marseille is probably more complicated than any other major city in the world because of the fact that it is such an incredible narrow street. Marseille, you know, it's the second largest city in France, and it was founded by the Phoenicians, and that was in about 59 BC. It really is remarkable how long this place has been around. In fact, it was established 2,600 years ago. And these riders are going to taste a little bit of that history when they go down there by the old port. And whenever they go down to the old port, it always conjures up memories to me of that great film, The French Connection.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, fantastic film that was too. Sam Posey will remember that one, being a fast car driver. Looking at the riders here, the rider here from Kelme, he made his move on the Côte de Jaillet. After 170 kilometers, 27 kilometers ago now when he broke away. That's about 16 miles back. He's got 23 to go, and they are still having a problem bringing him back. They're hovering at 25 seconds, which is hardly a breakaway, really. But he might stay out of sight now as we go through the streets of Marseille. We're in the outer suburbs just at the moment. The peloton is just 22 minutes behind them. They are closing in. We expected that. But I reckon that they could still be 10 or 12 minutes back of them before when they get to the finish.
But looking at this team on the front here right now, they don't have the big firepower of the team like US Postal Service. You see, the Postal Service, they're not worried about bringing back any time at all on this breakaway because Gutierrez, the lone leader right now, is the most dangerous man in the overall classification. But he's 47 minutes behind Armstrong as we look at the back end of the pack. Now, this is a big surprise here. Number 51 there in the red jersey. Yeah. That is Gilberto Simoni, the winner this year of the Giro d'Italia. Rumours are rife on the wires this morning that this man will abandon the Tour de France here tonight in Marseille, maybe because there's an airport close by.
Yes, indeed, the same airport, sadly, that Yoshio Belocchi has probably found, because he's now gone by aircraft across to Spain, and he's in hospital there, probably for an operation on his broken femur.
In fact, he's been moved to a private clinic for that operation, which they hope will get him back up riding again in a couple of months. But basically, the injuries that he had there, Phil, will put him out for the rest of this season, including the Tour of Spain and, of course, the World Championships. 102 is the lone leader right now, and he still seems to be accelerating. He's got the advantage right now, Phil, of being in the streets of Marseille, the outskirts of Marseille, because his advantage is only 20 seconds, but in these short streets, the chasing group of 8 riders, they can't see him, so with a bit of luck for him, they'll lose the morale of not actually having him in their sights.
He's about 4 kilometers from rubbing shoulders with the Mediterranean. In the old Tours de France, when the riders came down here, they'd have jumped off their bikes and put their feet in it and got back on the bikes and carried on. But that won't happen now, not with a race the way the Tour de France is organised. 21.5 kilometres now to go, so he's not too far away from seeing the countdown banners, which start at 20 kilometres from the line. Well, there's the peloton. All that Euskaltel Euskadi can hope to do now is reduce the gains of these riders and therefore live to fight another day in the Pyrenees for the team. We'll take another short break. And welcome back. Today's stage of the Tour de France. We're heading to Marseille now, the second city along the route, which hosted the very first Tour de France back in 1903. A Spanish rider still trying to spoil the flow of things here, Jose Enrique Gutierrez. Not going too well for him because just 20 seconds back now to the remnants of the breakaway he was with. And don't forget, what would you like to do for $100? Well, Beach Ambush will return in August. All the fun of the beach, and you can see that Sundays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern and Pacific time here on OLN. 18 kilometres left to go. We're coursing through the streets at 17 kilometres. We'll turn onto the Mediterranean coastline. Little bit of picture break up there as we passed under the tunnel. Spoilt our signal. All back together again. I'm sure many of you must agree with us that the pictures that our cameras bring of a race out of this nature on the highways with the helicopters, the motorbike mounted cameramen are simply fantastic. Just look how close we are into the face of Jose Enrique Gutierrez at the moment. You can almost feel the pain with him.
He is dangling off the front of this chasing group of 8 riders, but he's not given up at all. It came down to 15 seconds a few moments ago, and it's now stretched up again towards the 20-second mark. But in fact, talking about the pictures of the finish, the Tour de France, Phil, was actually boycotted by Marseille for many years. It came here in 1971, and Eddie Merckx had wanted to take a bit of revenge over Luis Ocaña on the stage the day before, where Ocaña had given him a hard time. He went from the gun. They finished in Marseille 2 hours ahead of the scheduled time finish. They hadn't even put the finishing line down.
That sounds like Eddie, and in fact, because of that, they said they didn't want the Tour de France ever again. It took a long time before it was brought back. In 1989, it was welcomed back, and Vincent Barteau was it the winner on that day?
Vincent Barteau was the winner on that day, and it was the 14th of July as well.
Bastille
one of the rare
good day to
French
come
winners
back.
on Bastille Day.
But I can tell you now that this town has welcomed it. In fact, sat alongside me a few moments ago, a young lady I met in South Africa this year where she was racing, Séverine Desbois. You may wonder why I'm telling you that. Well, I'm telling you because she's a very famous woman racing cyclist here. She's on the national team for France, but she also works here as part of the direction of the Marseille Council, the organising committee for the Tour. And so she was here just to say hi, and she's gone now to organise the finishing line, can you believe?
Gutierrez's lead coming down again there. You can see Gutierrez just going under the bridge there, and there's a bit of a flurry of activity behind right now. Phil, it's a bit crazy the way these guys are riding. They need to organise themselves as a job lot. Each one of them sharing the pace, making a little push there coming from Bram de Groot at the back in the Rabobank jersey for René Hasselbacher. There, finally we can see it. There is the Mediterranean as this man looks over his shoulders. He will know that they're closing in on him surely but swiftly.
They're going to pick him up as he makes the left turn down the plage here, or the beach, and then he'll run right down into the old port of Marseille. He'll go right around the old port. I hope he doesn't get lost. It's a bit narrow down there. And then he'll continue along the plage before finally they turn back into the town and up towards the finish, which is outside the cycling velodrome here.
Another man has gone right now. He's just clipped off the front there. That's Fabio Sacchi, and you saw him earlier this season riding very well in the Jacobs Creek Tour Down Under. He's always been so close to winning that bike. He's caught Gutierrez there, and he's now the new leader on the road. This is a vicious attack. What a great catch.
Well, a lot of riders would like to see Sacchi win because he's one of the world's great triers and real big men in the service of team leaders. He almost won that Jacobs Creek Tour Down Under, you know. He's finished placed in the top 3, and he got the race lead this year, and they took it off him in the Barossa Valley, where it's almost as hot there in January as it is here now in the month of July.
Hasselbacher in the red helmet there on the left-hand side. He made the effort to pull them all back together. He wants to keep this tight if he can because he wants the chance of getting a crack at the sprint. Now the move by Jakob Pale. They need to pull this man back because if he gets 50 or 100 metres off the front of them, he's a tough man to draw in.
Now, Bjarne Riis is the manager of this team. This man is on the same team as Tyler Hamilton. And Jakob was last year's champion of Denmark, a very, very strong rider. He's winner of Paris Tours, which is a one-day classic race. He has a lot of speed in those legs. And look at this, the group behind, because of Fabio Sacchi's attack, the tough chase to bring back Gutierrez, for the moment are sitting up. There's the train station down there. All lines go everywhere here in France, but they all stop at Marseille when you get down to the ocean.
Well, this man had a very good campaign in the early part of the year, actually, in the United States, because he won himself a race in Lancaster just before the US Pro Championships. He's a great bike rider, and this will give the team a huge boost to their morale. They had a hard blow in the early part of the Tour de France when their man Tyler Hamilton was involved in a crash on day one out on the open road and a double fracture to his collarbone. I can't believe that he's still in the bike race, Phil, and I can't believe that he's still actually capable to attack Lance Armstrong as he did on the Alpe d'Huez. Now this is Nazon, the Frenchman from the Brioche La Boulangère team.
Well, he's going to feel the rider who could win, because of he's a great sprinter, and he knows now he's under pressure. He's got to mark every move here. He's French, he's a sprinter, and this is the best chance he's ever had of winning the stage.
Philippe Gaumont on the back there in the blue shorts. He's trying to play the crafty game. He's a man who could surprise them all in the sprint. He's not regarded as a pure sprinter, but he's a kind of guy who can finish it off. There's a big gap, but in fact Nazon is coming across. He's halfway across right now.
Well, we're going round the port now. We're heading along to the old port. It is still, let me just have a look, it is still 3 or 4 kilometres to get round to the old port of Marseille. We're at the 15-kilometre to go point right now. We should see the banner very shortly. We're not quite there, but this is a big surprise. Now, if Nazon comes across, Jakob Peel knows the quality of this man in a sprint. He may stop working. He may just say, that's it. We're going to go back in the group and try another move, because no point in going to the finish with Nazon.
Certainly not. He's had a lot of wins this year. 3 wins to be correct, and the first one, there's 15 kilometres to go. So they're just going past the Gare Maritime, the area where you can just hear all of the horns. The ships out there, the ferry boats are letting off their horns to salute the Tour de France's entry into the streets of Marseille, where we haven't actually been for 10 years. Last time we came here was 1993, when Fabio Rossioli got himself the stage win. It's still a good move. This man not looking over his shoulders right now. He doesn't want to know whoever is coming back. When you go with a move like this inside the last 20 kilometres, you've got to give your all, and these guys have lost the impetus right now. They need to get organised if they want to pull him back. Hasselbacher launches the counter-attack down the right-hand gutter, right on his wheel there. In fact, it's not Nazon coming across. In fact, it's Fabio Sacchi who's gone again. That's why the Brioche La Boulangère team changed the colours just before the Tour de France, because of the confusion.
10 days ago, Paul, that they had to put white sleeves on their jersey so we'd recognise the difference. Obviously, you're right. This is Seiko's. I'm sorry, Fabio, because we know this man so well. I bought a suitcase while I was in Australia, and by mistake it was so big, and he came up to me and said, what are you going to go with that suitcase? I said, Fabio, I'm going to watch you ride the Tour de France.
Did you see what he just did? He just crossed himself, having come across the gap there. He's a very religious bike rider. Many of the Italians are. He crossed himself just as he crossed the gap onto the tail there of Jakob Peel. He feels very confident with this one. He reckons it's in the bag right now.
Well, in fact, this is Damien Nazon sitting second wheel in this group. Fabio Sacchi, by the way, is a very useful sprinter too. So Jakob Peel may not feel too comfortable now that Sacchi is with him. 2 men going for gold today. We'll take a break. We're now with the leaders of today's stage of the Tour de France. They have just 12.5 kilometres to go. About 28 seconds for Peel and Sacchi ahead of the remnants of the breakaway. Just 1 win for Fabio Sacchi this year. It came on the 2nd day of the Jacobs Creek Tour Down Under. He got the lead. They took the lead off him before the finish. He'd gone to Australia with the ambition of winning that race. Now he is just 12.5 kilometres away from taking what for him will be the greatest victory of his life, if, of course, he can beat Jakob Peel.
Well, it's panic on board here, Phil, for the 7 men left behind. They really don't know what to do. They can't get themselves organised. Everyone can feel the victory disappearing away from them. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to leap across the gap on their own. And in fact, it's not a very good organisation, because the last time check is 45 seconds to the chasing group of 7.
Well, it's a good phrase to say. I think they've missed the boat here in Marseille, because they've gone. They're working too well together. That these boys are not working. Garcia da Costa shakes his head. Now somebody else has gone off. This break is going to go home in 1s and 2s.
That's Bram de Groot just disappearing up the road in the horizon, and it's René Hasselbacher taking up the pacemaking behind. But all of these accelerations and stops are good for the breakaway situation, because the two men at the front, they are sharing the pacemaking, keeping the pressure on as much as possible as they go inside of 10 kilometers to go. They're now right alongside the area which is known as the Corniche, and very shortly they'll be right out against the Mediterranean.
Just inside, 10 kilometers to go. As one of the race director's cars goes past there, moves clear. These two are riding so quickly now. And boy, does the Mediterranean look inviting on a day like this, as they scorch around the Old Port area. They'll stay on the beach on the Plage Road for quite a way yet, until the last 5 kilometers in fact, and then they'll start to turn back towards the city itself. This is the next time check, and this will be 10 kilometers to go for Bram de Groot. He is the third man on the road now. Another man who's cursing his luck at missing that move, but he's trying to put it to rights.
Well, Bram de Groot has won in this area before in the early part of this season, because he won the opening stage of the Tour of the Mediterranean, an early season stage race which many of these riders use to turn their pedals in anger for the first time in every season, and they always have a stage finish here in Marseille. The Côte d'Azur, which is not too far away from here, looks absolutely splendid today, Phil. The Mediterranean is great. These two riders are thinking about a stage victory, and it's going to be a very closely fought-out battle between them, and I really can't imagine which one has got the advantage here, because there are 3 wins to Jakob Pale, number 77 there, and 1 win so far this season for the man on the frontier right now.
If they do come down together, I'll tell you there'll be some cat and mouse tactics in the last 500 meters. And welcome back. We're looking here at Bram de Groot. We'll take another short break, and then when we've done that, stay with us for the finish. And I think we're going to be in for something special. And welcome back. The Tour de France in its last 7 kilometers for the front runners today. It's still a long way back to Lance Armstrong and his group, some 22 minutes still behind. Those 2 riders are clear, Fabio Sacchi and Jakob Peel of Denmark, and they're prizing open the gap now. It's more than a minute. They could well take this stage between them now. There's a massive crowd here lining the road as we race into and around the streets of Marseille, and it's now around the Old Port now as we continue. We'll stay with the ocean side of the Mediterranean for until the 5 kilometers to go, and then we'll swing inland back on ourselves and up towards the finishing line. Bram de Groot is probably the only man now who could spoil the party at the front there for the Dane and for the Italian, that the gap is opening up, and I don't think that they can close a gap of a minute. That was a good move by Peel and well read by Fabio Sacchi.
He really dug deep to get across, but there had been an awful lot of aggression as we got towards the finish. You get a chance there to see. I think that's a cheetah on the front end of his bike there.
Well, cheetahs are capable of speeds of 80 kilometers an hour, the fastest land animal in the world. I wonder if Fabio Sacchi can match that in the sprint.
Well, he'll need to, but maybe it's because he's expecting to pounce when we get down to the finishing line.
The thing about these two, Paul, is they're both equally balanced in every way. Now, it looks to me as though Sacchi there was just doing the ratchets up on his shoes, just tightening them up, because they slacken them off, you know, during a day of this heat, because the feet begin to swell and get quite painful at times because of the hot weather, and this had been the hottest day of the Tour de France. Bram de Groot in 3rd place, big rider from the Netherlands. They could do with a nice result for Rabobank, but they might well have to be content with 3rd now.
Well, Bram de Groot is a long way back, and he's actually losing time on the 2 leaders. He's 1 minute and 8 seconds behind. The remnants of the group with him are a further 20 seconds in arrears, but they seem to have lost all of their impetus in the organisation to try and chase down the 2 men who launched a perfect attack at around about 17 kilometres to go to the finish. The race, by the way, finishes outside a very famous centre. There's been a crash somewhere.
There's a crash. I think it must be in the main field. We are hearing. I hope you see pictures very shortly. We're looking at the 2 leaders here at the moment, but I think Pavel Padrinos of the US Postal Service is involved in the crash. Now, we're in the hands of our friends of French television, and there may not be a camera down there at the moment, so we'll sit with that and we'll keep informing you as we find out. We're now with the 2 leaders still here, and this is Fabio Sacchi.
That information coming through on the race referees channel, which is plugged right into our ears here in French. and it keeps us up to scratch on just exactly what's happening at all corners of the race and at all times. And I was just trying to get into the fact that we're finishing today, Phil, outside the Olympic Marseille's football ground, a very famous football team, which at one time was presided over by Bernard Tapie, who brought the first $1 million contract into the sport of cycling when he signed up Greg LeMond way back in the 1980s for the La Vie Claire team.
That is absolutely right. Now we are hearing that indeed Pavel Padronos has fallen. He seems to be the only rider, so I don't think it is too serious. That's all we know at the moment. These are the two leaders, and the main pack are still more than 20 minutes back of them. Now there's nobody in this breakaway, and there hasn't been, of course, who will endanger any of the leading positions overall in the Tour de France. The best placed was Gutierrez, 47 minutes behind at the start of the day. We now swing away briefly from the Mediterranean. Well, for the rest of the day we'll swing away from it, because we're now moving into the last 5 kilometres with the two leaders.
Well, they're just moving away from the very famous beaches of Marseille, where people come down on the weekends to enjoy the Mediterranean coast, the beaches of the Prado, and they will finish today in the Avenue of the Prado. The time gap right now is still rather a large one over the second man on the road. In fact, De Groot has closed it down a bit, Phil. It's 46 seconds, but it's around about a minute and a half to the 5 chasers.
Well, the thing is, if he persists, because I think there'll be a slowing of those two leaders, because nobody among the two of them will want to take the pace up in the last kilometre. And we've seen it happen before. Remember when Stephen Roach lost the Liège-Bastogne-Liège Classic because he was dicing with Claude Coquillon. They never noticed Moreno Argentin coming up, went straight past them and took it on the line.
The same, that was a brilliant finish, a very exciting finish. Race radio, by the way, just announcing that Padronos got back onto his machine and very quickly got back into the main field without too much of an injury. But once again, it just accentuates the fact that you have to be attentive on every day and every kilometre of the Tour de France, because a crash can be hiding around any corner.
Jakob Peel putting his head down, trying to lift the pace. They'll do about 200 or 300 metres or yards, and then he'll swing off and ask Fabio. They'll see the little flick of the elbow there. That's the sign for the mate behind to come and do his bit of work. And Peel drops into the slipstream, saves 30% of his energy there. This rider is, it looks as though it's gone out again. I think that was a poor time check we've got. It's now 67 seconds.
Well, the two men at the front are working very hard together, and there's not one of them shirking and trying to adopt a tactical manoeuvring of sitting at the back right now. And the reason for that is they know that they need to get into the last kilometre with a clear advantage, because there will be some tactical manoeuvring between the two of them. This is the chasing group of 5 right now. They too are moving away from the coast. They're heading into the very heart of Marseille. And in fact, not also is it the finish outside the stadium of the football club Olympique Marseille. It's also the home of the very great velodrome here in Marseille, which is known as the Velodrome des Olives. It was built back in 1929. And actually, before we get to the finish, I just wanted to get in one interesting fact which I'd forgotten all about. In 1902, the year before the first Tour de France was actually organised, the organiser of the Tour de France, Henri Desgrange, organised the race from Marseille to Paris. And you didn't know that?
Actually, I didn't. I'm just wondering how you found it out. But there we are. That's well done, Paul. And that must be a bit of a forerunner then for the Tour de France, because that was the year that Desgrange was on about the idea of a lap of France. In 1903, it was cancelled, the first suggestion in 1903, but the second time, and he put the prize money up a little bit. He got some 78 entries, 60 starters, and I think it was 28 finished the race. Looking now at Bram de Groot, he's caught in no man's land. He'd be happy with third, but he would have liked to have had a shot at first. These two riders are going to do that, because Bram has lost time now. He's at 66 seconds, and the chase behind Paul is only 45 behind him, so they could yet pick him up. The main field no longer being timed, but we know they're probably around 20 minutes down. That's a long way back. These are the two leaders now coming in towards the finishing line. It's a long, long straight finish. The field now being shown at 23 minutes. Well, Paul, I agree with you. I have no idea who can win this, because they're both very equal at this sort of a finish.
Well, I think the best thing to do right now is we'll pick a rider each, and one of us will get the win. I'll tell you what, I'll go first. I'll go for Saki.
That's not fair, because I was going to go for Saki, probably because I know him. I've enjoyed watching him race in Australia, but Jakob Peel equally. This would be a great result for either one of these riders, and they both deserve it, of course. 203 kilometres in front today. 3 kilometres left to ride. So he's 200 kilometres in front right now. Ooh, and a bit of a sharp bend, and Saki took it wide because he wanted Peel to come round. There might be a slackening in the pace now. Jakob Peel may not want to take up the running. He'll want to come off the back wheel of Saki. Saki knows that, because I think Saki is the faster of the two when it comes to the sprint, but I'm not sure that he will want to lead Peel to the line.
The difficult thing about a breakaway like this is you have to put all of that information to one side, because certain riders can be very fast on occasions, but when you've ridden 125 miles together, the body has reacted in different ways. And we also compound that with the heat that we've had on today's stage, temperatures soaring up to almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the nerves as well of being on a stage of the Tour de France, because this is so important for a bike rider. These riders will maybe never ever get the chance like this again in a race like the Tour de France, because you very rarely get a gift horse like this when you get into a breakaway, which is regarded of no consequence to the overall classification, and you have the chance of building a huge margin over the main field. And then with 2 kilometers to go, you've got to think, I can win this, and nerves start to set in.
I can imagine that the adrenaline must be pumping now. Let me just tell you why it is of no worry to Lance Armstrong, because Fabio Sacchi is 50 minutes behind, lost time already. Jakob Peel is 1 hour and 34 minutes behind. Now, looking at the home straight, in the distance is the kilometre, a bit further on is the finish. This would have been a wonderful finish for the likes of Baden, Cook and Robbie McEwen, but they are 20-odd minutes back in the main pack. It is just 2 men on this wide open boulevard. That was a nice gesture.
Brilliant. That is just goes to show the solidarity of these professional bike riders.
The fact they've done that, they might go side by side and have a pure sprint.
Well, you don't see that very often.
Just look at this again.
That is quite remarkable. That's what men did in the old days of cycling. They would work together until the finish, and then they will drag strip and not try and outmaneuver each other, and it's going to be a great finish. And one man, unfortunately, after a 125-mile breakaway, has to lose.
Well, I've never seen that before, apart from the infamous one a couple of years ago when Lance Armstrong shook hands with Jan Ullrich at the top of Luzardi Den. The mountains were behind them, and Ullrich was acknowledging Armstrong was going to go to Paris as the winner. But that was a really nice gesture from Sacchi to Jakob Peel. Now they're approaching the last 1,000 metres. Just look at the crowd here. All of France is watching the Tour de France this year, I think. And now I was just wondering if they were just going to go side by side and race it out, but it looks as though Sacchi is now waiting. And it looks as though Jakob Peel is having a quick word with his team manager there to know what to do. He's got a little race radio transmitter under his racing jersey.
What to do? That is so difficult in a situation like this. They've got plenty of time to play with. They don't actually have to worry about a return of the chasers. The last time check we got back to Bram de Groot was 1 minute and 7 seconds, and almost 2 minutes back to the remnants of the breakaway, which is still 5 riders, and 23 minutes back to the main field. On the front, it's Jakob Peel. This is a nervous moment. He's right up against the barriers right now. He's making sure that the wind doesn't have any effect on the sprint towards the line. He's looking, he's waiting for the shadow. He's waiting for the sound of the whistle coming from the acceleration of the tyres of Fabio Sacchi in second position.
He's got to go sooner or later, and it's just like you're in a velodrome here, high on the banking, because the rider on the front is just turning his neck to wait for the move and hope he can beat him by a fraction of a second. But here it comes, and I don't think he's got a chance. He's gambling on a quick release as he comes up to his back wheel, a quick deep breath, and then can he take him? Fabio Sacchi is racing to what would certainly be the biggest result of his life, but watch out, Jakob Peel is finding the legs to the line, and that is a tremendous result for Jakob Peel. He did turn on the style, he led to the line, he forced Sacchi to make the move, and Jakob Peel has got the win for Denmark and for the Tour de France winner of 1996, Bjarne Riis, because he manages the team.
Well, that was almost a sprint in slow motion there, Phil, because these two guys led the race for 125 miles, and poor old Fabio Sacchi had to lose the race. Somebody had to lose, and unfortunately he started the sprint just a little bit too far out, and Jakob Peel was able to respond, get to his slipstream, get a bit of breath back, and then just cruise by once he got the big gear rolling. Third place, it's going to go to Bram de Groot.
Bram de Groot of Holland, Rabobank team, of course, ripped apart from the very first road race stage, the loss of the American Levi Leipheimer and Mark Lotz with serious injuries from the race, and that mass pile-up out at Mo. And they've also had a fall to their other leader, Michael Bogart, who has stitches in his knee. They've got third. Now, this should be a battle of the sprinters, the Gerolsteiner rider René Hasselbacher and the man in red and white, and that'll be Damian Nazon. Hasselbacher is going to launch the attack. Now, can Nazon, who's on his wheel, come off it? Better watch the far side. Vincenti Garcia Acosta isn't a sprinter but an opportunist, but the two sprinters clear. Now, these should have won the stage, but they were outwitted by the other three, and they're racing for only fourth place. Hasselbacher, I have to say, Paul, riding this a little bit like an amateur, because if you lead out Damian Nazon for this length of the home straight, you're going to lose, right?
Absolutely. Swung across now. He knows that the whole of the group has come back together. There's still a long way to go to the finish line. Vincenti Garcia Acosta in the orange and blue jersey there of iBonesto.com done a lot of work to bring it all back together.
Gaumont will go next. Watch Philippe Gaumont on the left here. He's really on the rivet, but he's having a go for anything he can get. A fourth place finish in the Tour will be great for him. But here comes Damian Nazon. He'll be kicking himself now. The fastest finisher of the group, a pure sprinter, this man. And he had a great chance at winning the stage. He's throwing it away. Hasselbacher's going to try and run him to the line, but no. Nazon, Hasselbacher, Philippe Gaumont as they come over the line. Serge Baguet and Vincenti Acosta, Garcia Acosta. That was the order over the line. Well, we're looking here at the result of the day. Fabio Sacchi, we thought, had done it, but of course he was beaten on the line by Jakob Pil. Pil did well to hold back at this stage, and somehow he found another kick. Sacchi went a little bit too soon, and he'll analyse this for the rest of his career, I would think, but he hit the front too soon, and as a result, Jakob Pil had the finishing sprint. Right, don't forget that we still have the main field to come in. There'll be a great sprint for that, because we've got the yellow jersey and the sprint for the green jersey. These two, we hope, are still the best of friends as we take a break and they come back for the bunch. And welcome back, everybody. Here comes the rest of the Tour de France today. The first 9 men are now heading for the shower, as we are waiting for these riders now to contest the 10th place finish, and back in charge are US Postal. Well, looking here at US Postal, Pavel Padronos, he's one of the tall riders, if we can pick him out. He crashed a few kilometres out. He's got back, and as far as we know, he's back up with the leaders again of the bunch.
He's back up with the bunch, but this is the difficult thing that happens on stages like this. And here is
this is in English, actually, Paul. We might be able to hear this.
That's a nice feeling. I tried the last 2 years to win and had bad luck, but I'm very happy now.
Oui, ça fait 2 ans en fait que je cours
For a change, they're interpreting it into French. So, Jakob Pil, yes, he's ridden the Tour de France a couple of times before, and indeed, he's been close to winning stages. He's a very surprising rider. He was part of the Linda McCartney team, don't forget, and that was the team which collapsed, and then he had to find himself a new team. Here's the peloton, a little bit of picture breakup for some reason. It must be the camera out there on the helicopter, as we're looking down on the peloton, which is still under escort of US Postal Service. It won't always be that way, because the sprinters, Robbie McEwen and Baden Cook primarily, Eric Zabel too, I'm sure, will want the 10th place sprint because of the points for that green jersey. It'll be a very good sprint.
It'll be a very tight sprint. It's very important for those guys. In fact, in the early sprint out on the course, Robbie McEwen only just got ahead of Baden Cook, and I thought we probably needed a photo finish at that point, Phil. It was that close, and it's a decision that might get reversed at the end of the day. That means at that point that, in fact, Robbie McEwen closed in by 2 points on the advantage of Baden Cook. That's the tough thing about trying to win the green jersey points competition. You have to fight on every stage of the Tour de France, where, for example, today Armstrong could sit back and allow his team to do the pace-making. He didn't have to worry too much about challenges coming from men who are trying to beat him in the overall classification. It's, I suppose you could say, almost a day off for Armstrong, even though he's had to get out onto the bike and ride 137 miles.
Oh, yeah. Well, he'll be thinking of riding the bike again tomorrow on the rest day, just to keep loose. Because he knows they're going back into the next hard, tough ride of the Tour de France, the time trial. Lance has said he must ride a good time trial. He must give it 110%. He wants to win it by a big margin if he can. And then, of course, he'll be off into the Pyrenees. We're looking at this incredible crowd here in Marseille, the handshake, which will no doubt be all over the televisions around the world for a few days to come. A great show of sportsmanship between Fabio Sacchi and Jakob Piel. Sacchi was the one who offered his hand first, and Jakob Piel was the man that finished off the sprint for Denmark. He got the stage win, and for the team from Denmark, this is a big result.
It's a huge result, and I tell you what, the team will be relieved right now. Even though Tyler Hamilton, with his double fracture to the collarbone, is riding high in the overall classification, it's so good for a team to get an individual stage victory.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like winning a World Cup race if you win a stage of the Tour.
These lovely little islands just off the coast of Marseille, sitting in the Mediterranean. Beautiful blue waters. But as you see, not too many pleasure boats on the water today because they're all watching the Tour de France. That looks like the Fort Pumeg, I think it is. The field are still coming as US Postal keep control of this race. US Postal, remember, have been the team again of the Tour so far. What a wonderful team they are. Here they all are for you. Lance Armstrong in first place, of course, some would say. Roberto Heras, he lies in 8th. All of these are the helpers, and they're all for one man, Lance. Their own positions overall are just by consequence. They're not even aiming to be anywhere except support Lance and continue to Paris in the Tour de France. It's nice to see only 7 teams left in the Tour with 9 men. One of them is US Postal. Looking at the main field here, as we'll now expect to see Baden Cook go forward in that green jersey. He said now he's switched his ambition. It's not winning stages he wants, it's winning the green jersey as the most consistent rider. So it's only a sprint for 10th place today, but he'll take on Robin McEwen, and there'll be other intruders, I'm sure, try to beat him, because since we've come out of the Alps, we've lost a number of sprinters in this race, and so it can take on a very different approach to the line. There's life on the beach here in Marseille. 1 or 2 people not worried about who wins today's stage of the Tour de France, but not many, I can tell you. Well, we're not far away from the finish. We'll just take another break and wait for the big bunch. And welcome back. The peloton are still heading to the finish, and they've still got quite a way to go, I would think. Probably about 8 or 9 minutes of cycling still to come from them. And I think we can now show you the stage for a result brought to you by Pacific Life. Here they are. And Philippe Gaumont, I think this is a bit further down the field. There we are. Jakob Piel winning the stage. Fabio Sacchi in 2nd place. Bram de Groot getting 3rd. Look at the time gaps. This is all the original 9 men who escaped. That's all that's finished so far. We're waiting for the 10th man to come in. Damien Nazon kicking himself. The best sprinter only got 4th. And Serge Baguet, Vicente Garcia Acosta. Top 9 completed by the late attacker in Gutierrez. 5 minutes back. Here we are now with the field. They're still bringing Lance Armstrong home. None of those riders are going to affect the overall classification at all. Well, again, our helicopter breaking away from the Tour de France to show you some of the stunning views of the port here in Marseille. Such a varied multinational city. There's the pleasure boats, there's the deep sea liners, there's the beaches, and there's the industry down here in Marseille. Fabio Sacchi still sat very patiently, not far from our commentary box, or getting sponged down and waiting to be presented to the crowd as winner of the stage. The crowd, of course, waiting to see who will clean up in the big sprint for 10th place. The points competition is the major competition we're talking about today, because the time competition of Lance Armstrong, that'll remain the same. 21 seconds will be the gap to the second rider, Alexander Vinokourov, and a little bit further, just over a minute, in fact, to Iban Mayo. They've had a cyclist, what we call a day off, of course, but it isn't really. They've just made sure they've defended their gains from the Alps to carry over the rest day tomorrow and on towards the Pyrenees.
Well, after 137 miles in the saddle, there will be no change at all in the overall classification, and Armstrong can take a well-earned day off competition. He'll still have to ride his bike, and I would expect they will try and ride the bikes for the first 2 or 3 hours of the day, and then get into the cars and head down towards Narbonne, followed by a rapid massage and getting themselves ready for the stage from Narbonne to Toulouse. But after that, they're going to face another very important rendezvous, the time trial.
This is the tail of the bunch, and I saw Gilberto Simoni sat back there, and we think that that might be at the end of him today. Now, as we watch the peloton heading towards the line, the sharpening up the odds with George Hincapie, former teammate of George Hincapie, Frankie Andreu. Frankie, I think you're sat down there with Jakob Peel, the day's winner.
Jacob, from the start of the tour, Bjarne Riis said that you were the one that might be going for the stage wins. Today, you proved him right. Did you pick out this day on purpose?
Not really. It came up in my mind the last couple of days. I was starting to do better in the mountains, better than I used to do. I haven't suffered that much. So I thought about yesterday evening that today could be a good day to try, but still to catch the right breakaway with the right riders, it's difficult, but it happened today.
In the final kilometer, the handshake, were there words spoken or were there no words needed?
It was like, may the best man win, and yeah, luckily it was me.
Obviously, you're a pro at being a stage hunter. Are you looking towards another stage? Have you looked ahead at all?
Right now, I just look ahead for a rest day tomorrow, and then we take it from there.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, well done, Jakob. A great victory there. And it looks like a thumbs up there. But, you know, while we were talking there with Jakob Peel, we had a picture coming in as well of Pavel Padrinos. I think we can show you that. Yes, there it is. That wasn't quite a simple fall he had, did he? We never saw pictures of the crash, but he's obviously taken quite a fall. He looks okay, and it looks superficial. They're tough, these bike riders, aren't they? And I'm sure US Postal will find him a new jersey before the day after tomorrow when the race resumes. Dizzy old picture, that one, Paul, as they all lean around that roundabout. Yaroslav Yekimov working well on the front. There, just look at this. Well, it's not normal we can fit in yet another break in between all of the action here, and the peloton and the winner arriving home. But that's the way it is today. We are still waiting for the peloton, and 18 minutes has ticked by. Stay with us on OLN and enjoy the race. And welcome back. The peloton are finally into town, big time now, as they run up towards the finish. Over 20 minutes has gone by since Jakob Peel won the stage. And you can see now the boys in white are trying to lead out Baden Cook. Also trying to get involved is Freddie Rodriguez as well, his team. The green jersey, though, of Baden Cook is having to launch this one now. David Miller looks as though he's going to give a perfect lead out here to Bradley McGee as they head up towards the line now. It is David Miller of Britain doing the lead out, followed by Bradley McGee and followed by the green jersey of Baden Cook. Now Robin McEwen is going to have to profit from this. There is McEwen still dodging amongst the wheels, wanting to keep riders away from him. Eric Zabel is also there, and McGee looked to see who punched him. Then it was Eric Zabel who pushed him out the way. Zabel is still on the wheel of Freddie Rodriguez. This is going to be, in fact, I think that is Roman Weinstein who's got back there. But as they lead towards the line, 300 meters to go now. This is the final lead out for Baden Cook, and Zabel has got Baden Cook's wheel. And then comes McEwen is on the left. Cook is making determined finish, but look at Robbie McEwen as he puts into the line. McEwen and Cook, and I don't know how they are going to split them. Maybe McEwen, Paul, but it was close.
It's very close, very close. It's going to have to go down to the photo finish there right now, but it's important for the man in the green jersey in the middle, Phil, to get points on every stage. He's in front of Robbie McEwen here. It's the lunge for the line. Freddie Rodriguez was behind there in the lime green jersey. He was well to the front, but in this picture here, you can't see the line. We need a side-on shot, and I have a feeling Cookie might have got that by a fraction.
Well, your guess is as good as mine. As we watch this sprint, let me remind you, Lance Armstrong finishing safely in this bunch with his team. There'll be no change overall, and it was Freddie Rodriguez who tried to break into the action there in that yellowish jersey. Zabel is third in line, but watch the first two here and see if the helicopter will split them. It was close, but it was a great result for both of them, and I think, you know, it is Baden Cook.
Cookie got that. It was a desperate lunge to the line there by Robbie McEwen up alongside him. Eric Zabel was in fine position, but he just doesn't have the speed in these flat sprints, which are run off at 65 kilometers an hour. On the left-hand side there, the man who won the green jersey competition last year. On the right-hand side, the man who won it 2 years ago. And in the middle, the young man from Australia who's leading the competition is not going to give it up that quickly.
Well, So much pressure on Robin McCune. He leaned across there, and it wasn't an intentional nudge on his mate Baden Cook. But let's have a look at the situation overall. Lance Armstrong, no change at all finishing safely in the main pack. Alexander Vinokurov, the winner yesterday, 21 seconds still behind Lance. Iban Mayo is in third place at 62 seconds. Francisco Mancebo, Tyler Hamilton riding superbly, now gets to the rest day. He'll welcome that. He's in fifth place. A little bit further down, Jan Ullrich is still a menace in this race, there's no doubt. Only just over 2 minutes off the lead. Roberto Heras, a good second string to Lance, and Denis Menchov, still the best young rider in this race, 3 minutes 45 seconds back. Well, this has been a sort of rest day for the riders, but what a great race at the front, and what a great sprint here for only the 10th place. You'd have thought it was for the stage win. We'll be back for our final thoughts on OLN in just a moment. Welcome back as we look here at a cruise liner just coming in to Marseille. And what a beautiful day it's been, and the riders, the main field finishing on today's stage, 21 minutes and 23 seconds after the day's winner, Jakob Peel, and it will have moved up the best place rider there, Gutierrez, by about 15 places. He might just have pierced the top 30 with a bit of luck. This is how it all went the way of the Danish rider, Jakob Peel on the right. Saki went just a little bit too early and the legs wouldn't carry him. Well, he'd been in the lead for 203 kilometres, and it was a great result for Jakob Peel, who finally gets a win in the Tour de France. This is what happened earlier on in the race. This was when the move happened. First it was Jakob Peel went away, a great chase by Fabio Sacchi. He got up to Peel. They worked very well together. They even shook hands in the home straight, which I thought was a marvellous gesture of encouragement for them both and sportsmanship. Under the 4 kilometres banner, they were already a minute clear. There's the handshake offered by Sacchi. He really should have stayed behind him after that rather than going in front, but in the end he opened up the sprint out of the shadow of Peel. And I thought at this point he'd done it, but Jakob Peel just got a little bit of a second or two in the slipstream and he came again.
A different kind of sprinting here, Phil, because after 125 miles at the front end of a bike race like this, the body reacts completely differently. Peel waited for Sacchi to go into first place. On a normal day, Sacchi would probably have won that sprint, but this man on the left, he was just able to get the bigger gear ticking by, and it was almost like watching the sprint in slow motion compared to the kind of sprints that we see of Baden Cook, of Robbie McEwen and Eric Zabel, who will charge down a finishing straight like this at about 65 kilometres an hour.
And we both went for Sacchi, and we were obviously wrong. Sacchi really normally is a fast sprinter, but you know, when you've been in the lead for over 200 kilometres, the body changes somewhat, and if it's the fresher of the two who will get the victory, obviously. Well, it's been a good day of racing for Lance Armstrong, because finally nobody placed him under attack, and that's not happened for a few days. And Lance will be glad of the sort of day off, but he'd be worried about the fall of Pavel Padranos, who looked as though he'd had a little bit of a knocking around when he came into the finishing line. But at least he's got the day off tomorrow, and he'd be happy about that. I think we can hear the old music playing, Paul, which is a good sign. We'll soon be seeing some presentations. 21 minutes and 23 seconds before the bunch came home.
Yeah, well, just to finish off the thought on Padranos there, Phil, he's a tough bike rider. He comes from Czechoslovakia, and I think after the rest day, he'll bounce back and still be a good man for Lance Armstrong in the mountains. But once again, it proves, you know, this sport of professional cycling is very dangerous. But what joy for this man.
Jakob Peel, he's won a single-day classic race from Paris to Tours. He's now won himself a huge stage in the Tour de France at a very famous city, one of the top 6 cities that were on the first route of the Tour de France. He's also taken the lead in the special classification that links only the stages which visit those 6 cities. And with a lead of 21 minutes over the peloton, he could well be the winner of that Inter-Tour, if you like, classification by the time he gets back to Paris. I don't think he'll even have realised that yet. The manager will probably explain it to him tonight.
Congratulated there, introduced by Bernard Hinault in the short sleeve jersey there, winner of 5 times at the Tour de France. As we look back down on the Vieux Port, the old port, which really is very much the centre of Marseille. But Phil, that was a great day for Lance Armstrong. Tactically, they were superb. They didn't have to worry about anybody in the breakaway. They just let the brakes go off the front. We didn't see very much of him at all, but the thing is, for him, he just sat in the main field and let everybody do the chasing.
Yes, for once he was a part-time player in the Tour de France, wasn't he? Instead of the man who animates the race. And over these last 3 days in the Alps, this has been a fantastic Tour de France. We are desperately sorry that Bolocchi's gone out, but I believe you will find that there are more riders who will take up the mantle. It's all oaring well too for the future of the sport, because I think next year we are going to see some of these youngsters really flower.
Well, next year, look at Iban Mayo, look at Vinokurov. Those are men who will seriously come back with challenges. Rogers will be a big rider when we come back to the Tour de France next year. We had a great sprint. It was a closely matched sprint, but it was almost a slow motion. A rest day, Phil, but the race goes on.
All right, well, there's never a day off for the commentators, of course, but we'll do our best. Anyway, those two have been out in the sun all day. How about it, Bob and Kirsten?
Do we look like we've been out in the sun? Come on, we've been inside listening and watching to you two. Seriously though, Bob, today was a good stage to remind everybody that there's so many stages so many races within the Tour. I mean, you've got the race for the points jerseys, you've got stage wins, and we saw a little bit of everything today.
Yes, a vicious sprint for the green jersey between Baden Cook and here's Lance Armstrong getting his yellow jersey, maintaining the same 21-second margin over Alexander Vinokurov. Pretty tactically perfect day for U.S. Postal. A big breakaway, gets a lot of time. They just keep them there. Nobody within 45 minutes of his lead, so it's almost impossible in modern-day cycling for any breakaway to get more than about 15 or 20 minutes, even in a situation like this. Nobody willing to do any of the tempo except the Postal riders, just to maintain that advantage over Lance Armstrong. Also a very day in which the Postal riders could recover a little bit, Lance especially, and they have a rest day and then a time trial coming up. So ideal day for Lance Armstrong and the Postal riders.
And remind us again why it was okay to let all those guys go out way ahead of them. 20 minutes out, they finished.
Yes, 20 minutes over, a little bit more than 20 minutes, because in cycling they take the time of each stage, and if you lose 5 minutes a day, for example, after a week's time you're over a half an hour down, and in the mountains big time is lost. So Lance Armstrong, knowing Jose Enrique Gutierrez at 47 minutes behind, they could let them get way up the road without any trouble at all. So in the finale, things naturally speed up, and they closed it down a little bit, but still, they didn't hardly move up at all on GC, which is kind of discouraging. Over 200-kilometer breakaway, and you're still in the same position. But the stage win going to Jakob Pale. He's a rider that won Paris Tours, a World Cup race, one of the longer World Cup races, and you have to be a very special athlete to win any World Cups. So Jakob Pale getting a great result for the CSC team.
And you said you were pretty impressed with him because you thought Saki had the legs and had the sprint taken care of.
I thought that Faki is the faster rider between the two, but you have to understand that they've ridden so long out in the front of the bike race, a little bit of the speed being reduced in the legs of Fabio Sacchi, and the man with more resistance able to win the sprint, and that was the Dane Jakob Pale on the CSC team. Tyler Hamilton proving to be an inspiration not only to the viewers out there, but also to his teammates.
And what a way to end stage 10 and go into a rest day. Everybody gave it their all at the end. Congratulations to Jakob Pale. Well, tomorrow is a rest day, but don't worry, we have you covered here on OLN. Tomorrow is our special rest day highlight show. It is at 8:30 p.m. That is Eastern Time. So we'll go through all the highlights, and there are plenty of them in this 2003 Tour. Don't forget, also tomorrow, while Bob and I are laying out on the beach having a nice fruity drink, you can have a live web chat with Phil and Paul. Go to our website, olntv.com. We are the official English language website of the Tour. That is going to do it from here in Marseille, France, for our entire OLN crew, all the guys behind the scenes that work so hard, Phil, Paul, Bob, Frankie, Pam, Sam, and myself. We will see you. Good night.